Hello, everybody. It's time to start this session, which is entitled Governing AI. Now, you already heard quite a bit from previous speakers on aspects of AI governance. So in this panel, we'll try just to hit on some specific aspects that were not already dealt with, and then try to get as much discussion as possible. The first thing I would like to do is introduce our panelists in order as they are sitting. Now, Wendy does not need an introduction for two reasons. One is that she was introduced this morning, but she doesn't need an introduction anyway. She didn't even need it this morning. However, I will repeat the fact that she was very much involved in the preparation of the United Nations report on harnessing AI for humanity, because this is something that she can draw upon in this panel discussion. Then we have, unlike what is written on the board, we have Anja Wyrobek, who is a legal professional with expertise and experience with the European Parliament in fundamental rights, surveillance, data protection, and artificial intelligence. She was very much involved in the process that led to the adoption of the EU AI Act, and is very much in the middle of things, in media res. Let's say there's a lot of turbulence around EU regulation in general and the AI Act in particular. We have Marc Rotenberg, who is the founder and executive director of the Center for AI and Digital Policy, CAIDP. Is that? That's okay. It's difficult. It's two consonants. CAIDP is its newsletter is, for me, the major source of reliable and timely information about what is happening in the AI landscape. He has been involved in the shaping of digital governance policy at the highest level, at the OECD, the US Congress, UNESCO, and the Council of Europe, and has directed many related studies. He has written two books that are available in the book display this year. The first one is the AI Policy Sourcebook, and the second is AI and Democratic Values Index. And then at the end is Paula Hidalgo-Sanchis, who is from the United Nations University, the coordinator of the United Nations AI network, aiming at the development of governance frameworks to achieve sustainable development. But for this panel, she has another attribute that I think is particularly pertinent. She has had more than 20 years of experience on the ground in countries that are, let's say, on the wrong side of the digital divide. Which brings me to the structure of the discussion that we will try to follow. The first issue has to do with how to harness the benefit of AI for all humanity, with emphasis on all. The second issue is the regulation landscape, what is happening, where are things going, what are the various competing forces at play. And then we'll end with a look of where things are going, in particular in the broader geopolitical context. So let's delve in on the first one. how do we harness the benefit of AI for all humanity. 30 years ago, in 1997, in Brussels, I helped organize the G7 Ministerial Conference on what was called at the time the Global Information Society. There were keynotes by Vice President Al Gore, and a very remarkable one by Thabo Mbeki. Thabo Mbeki at the time was the deputy president to Mandela of South Africa. And there were industrialists and sessions, and what I recall very vividly is a very passionate plea that Thabo Mbeki made on bridging the information technology divide, that was the language at the time, and not allowing the benefits of digital technology just to benefit the rich world. We're 30 years later now, and the divide is still there. In the United Nations report that I mentioned earlier, it says we should bridge the AI divide. Well, my question to the panel, the first question, is what are we going to do differently this time? Because 30 years ago, there were a lot of nice words and declarations that nobody could disagree with, but then it wasn't done. So, what will be done differently this time? Who will do it? Governments, private sector, civil society? Who will pay for it? Wendy, would you get the discussion going?
Thank you. I don't want to talk for too long because I've talked this morning and I'd love to hear the other panelists. I also, with the United Nations, will defer to someone who's got a lot more experience than I have, clearly in what you've been doing, but just, over the years. But just, I also want to apologise. I have to leave early. I was going to stay till tomorrow, but I've been called back to a meeting at Downing Street at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. The UK government is sorting out its AI budgets, and because I've been asked to be there, I'm going to be there. Thank you. So I have to leave about 3:10, I think. And I was at the United Nations last week, so I come hot foot from a meeting with the tech envoy, Amandeep Gill. So, Amandeep is just awesome. He's this very tall Sikh gentleman, wears a turban a lot of the time, very imperious and the most gentle man I know. And he is in charge of what is now called it was called the Tech Office, and it's now the, IDGT. Somebody look it up. Amandeep Gill. It's the office they've set up. They couldn't put the word AI into it, so it's Office for Technology and Digital and Emerging Technology, DGT. For obvious reasons, they couldn't put the word AI into it, even though it came out of, it's an extension of the Tech Office, it's come out of the AI reports that we wrote last year. But I think it's significant, it hasn't got the word AI in it, still digital and emerging technology. And the report, we're looking at a United Nations that has no money really. It's really, really on its uppers, as we would say, but they have been tasked with implementing the recommendations we put in our report, and so the things they're doing are, first of all, who's going to pay for it? One of the things, particularly for the global south. One of the things we put in the report was the development of a global fund to fund activity, support, whatever, investment in AI and the digital, because you can't do AI without the digital, but I get your point, in the global south. I hate the term, but as you know, developing countries, whatever. That, of course, includes India and China in many ways, but I don't think they'll be seeking to fund China particularly. But India is going to play a key role in this. And the key thing about, two things about India is A, the scale, of course, 1.4 billion people. They do have they have the scale to develop things in India that could be then transferred into the rest of the world. But also, what else was I going to say about India? I've forgotten. Where was I going with that one? Anyway, India is a big part. Oh, I know. The next summit, the next big AI summit is going to be in India. And President Modi will want to be announcing all sorts of things. Now, his focus will be on what's good for India. But I'm really hoping that between, and I'm going to stop here and so let other people speak, but I think that the UK started the AI summits with the Bletchley Park, and it started what we called in our report the Global Panel on AI, with the AI Safety Report. The idea is that the Global Panel will collect reports not just about safety, and I think I believe India is going to focus on the effects of AI on children. That's what I've heard. Or the youngsters. And I'm really hoping this is all going to converge in a way that is very powerful, because we've got another safety report being written, Joshua Benjoni's team coming from the UK, the summit's going to India, and they're starting to raise the money for the Global Fund. And I could say more, but I'd love to let the other panelists speak.
Okay. We'll go, keep your interventions, it's right after lunch, so keep them short and lapidary so we keep them awake. Otherwise, you'll see heads dropping very soon. The question remains, where will the money come from? We had a bad experience with climate change and the fund that was supposed to be created for the poor countries, how is that going to happen? Who wants to take the next response?
Okay, I'll jump in.
Of course.
I tend to be a bit soft-spoken, as you may have detected. So, George, you mentioned the G7 in 1997, and I was in Ottawa the following year for the ministerial conference of the OECD. And I would say that 20 years ago, most international organizations were frankly not making a connection between the developing world, the global south, and IT. I mean, there was an awareness of the gap. In the US, we talked about the digital divide. A good friend of mine who worked for President Clinton at the Department of Commerce, Larry Irving, devoted a great deal of time to making the internet more accessible across the US. But generally speaking, 20 years ago, this was not on the radar screen. The good news is that a lot has changed. So by the time the OECD did the AI principles, which I was involved in 2017 to 2019, the Secretary General, who is from Mexico, involved a lot of Latin American countries, wanted them actively to participate. So it wasn't just North America, Europe, and Japan. UNESCO has done remarkable work. I would call attention to the UNESCO recommendation on AI ethics, which was adopted in 2021.
Does it have money?
Well, what they did, which I think was very clever, is they set out a methodology. It's called the Readiness Access Methodology. And they basically put it back upon the countries with some training and support to think about the necessary steps to promote literacy and education and skills training and governance, by the way, because I think you need all of these elements. And over the last several years, UNESCO has made a lot of progress. We actually report on this in our book, the AI and Democratic Values Index. We look at the steps that countries are taking. I would mention even the Council of Europe, which has announced a new AI treaty, which is legally binding. This treaty is open for signature by both member states of the Council of Europe and non-member states. And recently I saw that Ghana was invited as an observer to participate in the treaty process. There will always be a question of resources. I think that's clear. But as I said, I think if we, remembering where we were 20 years ago and where we are today, I think there's been real progress in global governance. And Amandeep, I would certainly credit at the United Nations and the work that he's done to make sure that we have more of a global conversation and global participation.
Okay. Thank you. Paula, you spent 20 years of your short life being in those countries. So what's the situation on your ground?
Well, those 20 years felt very long, not short, in countries in the global south, as we call them now. What I believe, not think, believe, after all these years, is that if there is a will, there is a way. Okay? But is there a will? That's what we need to ask ourselves when we are talking about governance and AI. And why there should be a will? Because the projection by 2030, according to the Sustainable Development Goals report 2024 prepared by UNDESA, is that by 2030, 600 million people might still live in extreme poverty. That means living with less than $64 per month. So 65 times the population of Austria might be living, very likely, under poverty, by 2030. At the same time, and we talk about digital divide and inequalities, I think the tragedy of today's world is the way to inequality. At the same time, according to Deloitte, the ultra-rich families are expected to double their wealth by next year, reaching $9.5 trillion. That God knows what that is, So by 2030, just another piece of information or data, 1/5 is expected that 1 every 5 children will be suffering from stunning, that is chronic malnutrition, and that leaves a mark for a lifetime, while at the same time, 1 billion meals of editable food are wasted every day. Okay? So if there is a will, there is a way. Is there a will? I think there will be a will if we approach things like we have a lot to gain and we have a lot to lose, in terms of the situation in the world, on how to go about it. I think that we talk a lot about sustainability and sustainable development. What I think is that it's not sustainable anymore to continue doing things the way we've been doing them in terms of AI governance. It's not sustainable that academia continues doing research in isolation without talking or working with governments and private sector. It's not sustainable that private sector continues pushing the agenda, and a lot of discussion here about lobbying, but not being sit on the table of the dialogue. And it's not sustainable that civil society that has had a role in the latest big things that affected humanity is not yet advocating for the ethical use of technology. That's the way I see things. I stop here.
Thank you. Anja, anything on the European side? There's a new aid program being developed. Does it have any beef in it?
Well, I just want to really echo what Paula has said, and it's extremely interesting to hear these statistics, because at the moment what we are witnessing is that the technology that we are discussing is not used to the benefit of the people, and in particular you've mentioned the different actors in the development of laws. Coming from one of the EU institutions, I know a fair share about how lobbyists approach regulation, and it is rarely that the human is in the focus of this. So at the moment, I presumably can only say that the current narrative is going more into an industry-related environment and less so fundamental rights oriented. As regards 8 programs, what we will have in the beginning of June is an international data strategy. So there we will actually look at the cooperation with Asia and cooperation with the Global South and how we can improve the dialogues from a European perspective in cooperation with them. It is clear that we are unfortunately good ideas are born in Europe, but then they are sold in the US. And they are then unfortunately also dying here by being by way of acquisitions from big tech technologies. And I think that there are quite a few remarkable entrepreneurs and startups that we have here, and that could also have the so-called Brussels effect elsewhere. But unfortunately, due to capital, due to funding, and due to resources, they do not get to the stage where what we call hyperscalers with regard to the US, or even just scale further than what they have here. So I would say that there's quite much work ahead of us, and in comparison to what has changed 20 years ago, I think that you've mentioned the Council of Europe work. Well, we have the AI Act, and I think this piece of legislation was born quite fast in comparison to European legislation usually. So when we look at how fast European legislation is developed, this was significantly faster than the normal pace for EU legislation, and it's a start. It's a human-centric start. Yes, it is a piece that was born on concessions, so it's not ideal, it's not perfect, but which law is, and we will work with it. And unfortunately, what we hear, and I think this will be also subject of our discussion in the course of this afternoon, we will need to discuss simplification and whether or not it's already time to put the chainsaw on that piece, or whether it's actually premature.
Okay, thank you. I mean, this makes the bridge to the next topic, which is regulation, including what is happening with so-called simplification. But Wendy, I'm going to address something that concerns you now. Questions will be at the end of the panel. But this morning, Erich, when people wanted to ask Wendy questions, he said no, she will respond to questions at the panel later. But you see, she's leaving before the end of the panel. So, exceptionally, 2 questions, but addressed specifically to Wendy. Moshe.
That's not fair, but anyway, go on. Hello, Moshe. Hello there. So are you trying to simplify all laws or just the AI?
I'm asking you specifically as ex-president of a premier professional society in computing, ACM, which is that in this whole debate that we are having now about technology and its role in society, what should be the role of professional societies such as ACM? Who have, I would say, is that I can characterize it as basically trying to hide behind the rocks and make, so far ACM has been trying to hide behind the rocks and make sounds of a carrot, okay? Kind of become invisible in this debate in some sense. What do you think should be the role of professional society?
Okay, so I'm currently co-chair of the ACM Publications Board. Under my co-chairship, whatever it is, we're starting to launch. We're launching more AI journals. We set up a steering group to make sure we get involved in the debate from the academic point of view, and you'll see those results coming out more and more. We're launching something called AI letters to get a faster turnaround on reviewing. So they're short, pithy pieces as opposed to long mathematical papers no one can read. And the other thing we're doing, and I'm not supposed to talk about this, is there will be a big shindig next year in Atlanta, which will put the ACM on the map for AI and talk about the things here, not just that we're talking about here, not just a sort of technical research papers. But I can't talk about it in public yet. I can tell you quietly.
This is not public, it's a private meeting. This is a private meeting.
We're going to have a conference, but it won't be a conference of research papers, right? A workshop, a I'm calling it a shindig about what the computing community needs to think about in terms of AI, because we must be responsible for the technology we are helping to invent, even though the companies and a lot of governments these days are not interested in academia. They're not interested in talking to professors, and the companies take people out of universities. Of course they do, to work for them, but for some reason governments don't want professors. And as I said to the king, I haven't told people actually that I advised our king on AI now, because he's very interested in AI, and I go to Buckingham Palace and he calls me the AI lady. And to be fair, I've only met him once on that. I talk to his people mostly, but I'm very proud of being called the AI lady. And why was I going there? Oh yeah, because I actually said to him, he said, you know, AI professors do not grow on trees. It takes a long time to grow a good AI professor. And you need AI professors to train the next generation of people, whatever country of the world you're in, right? If you want the generation coming up from the undergrads to PhDs to the next generation of teachers or researchers. And woe betide governments who ignore that community. I'm so sorry that they are doing this. We're seeing it in the UK. I know we're seeing it in the US. I don't know the impact in what I call mainland Europe yet. But, they're not, by the way, they don't do this in China. I keep coming back to this. China's got it right in many ways. And woe betide us for ignoring that lesson as well. Can I say it any more strongly than that?
No, China is the model. One more question.
I didn't hear what you said.
But okay, you'll get a chance to ask more questions of the panel, but nobody else now for Wendy. My conclusion for this issue, the discussion on this issue, is that there is no visible source of closing the digital gap or the AI gap or anything.
Can I just correct something that I didn't tell the UN story clearly, and Moshe asked a different type of question. But we are responding. The thing about the UN, we recommended in our report, 5 things got accepted of the 6 we recommended, or 7, 6 got accepted. Basically, we recommended a big program on capacity building for the Global South, supported by the Global North, is it called? But anyway, industry, governments, a capacity building in the Global South. And the Global Fund is to support that effort. And the Global Fund, this is what Amandeep is now in charge of, raising the funding, and he's going around talking to foundations, philanthropists. It's not just governments, it's not just industry, it's trying to raise a significant amount of funding to actually support the capacity building. That is whether he'll be successful or not, I don't know. Okay. Yep. Right? You can say there's no point in him starting, but that's what he's actually just got the green light to start.
No, it's certainly, you know, this is the UN proposal is like, in that respect, like, you know, motherhood and apple pie. I mean, that's what should happen. Huh? The question is, will it? Past experience tells me that there will be another panel 30 years from now, and we'll be talking about closing the something else gap. Okay, there's a second. Okay, last question to Wendy, and then we continue with the next topic.
So this is to Wendy and also to Paula. But it maybe goes to the point here. I've worked for the UN also for many, many years on capacity building, ICT for development, and all the rest of it. But in AI, we've got a real problem because the hyper-monopolization of both compute power as well as talent within 2 countries really makes these words rather empty. I mean, there's a gap that just cannot be filled. And I wonder if you could speak to that, because it's nice rhetoric, but I'm just looking for the practicality here.
Okay, well, I think, you know, what is on the table right now is some very sensible proposals, like what the UN proposes, but
well, let me also just expand a little bit on something, and Marc, I think, picked up on it. I talked about the investors. I think you picked up on it, Marc, when you, I think you did. Anyway, yeah. There are people I don't know what's happening in the US, right? But in the City of London, there are a lot of people with a lot of money to invest, and they want to invest in AI, but they want to do it well. They don't want to invest in something that is going to destroy our society or humanity altogether. And potentially a way to hold the companies to account is something where the investors and the shareholders help to hold them to account in terms of explaining what they're doing and how they're doing it. And there was also in the last panel we had, somebody mentioned Linda, help me, was it? We were talking about the community, society as well, because collectives or what was
citizen assemblies.
Yes. So all that it's not none of these things on their own will work, right? We have to think of new ways to do this, and I mean when I was on the Internet Governance Commission, it was all about bringing together governments, industry, and society. Anyway. You want me to stop there?
Yes, yeah, let's stop on this entity here so we can move to the next one. My temporary, tentative conclusion remains that there are some good ideas on the table, but unless something changes from what was done 30 years ago, because also there were very good ideas on the table, but nothing much happened.
I think we're seeing the beginning of something, and it will be irresponsible stuff. Look what happened in Spain recently, if once our electricity goes, right, people will start complaining. When the infrastructure goes because of cyber attacks or because of things governments are doing, and we can't get access to any of this stuff, then people are going to start worrying, complaining. It's going to have huge effect. And the worry is, you hear people say, well, I don't want AI to have its Hiroshima moment before we do anything about it.
This comes to the next topic already, which is regulation, because it's safety. So, on the regulation scene, there are sort of two main schools. One is, let's call it the declarative school, which is voluntary, principle-based self-application of certain guidelines. And the other one is the actionable school, which means new legislation with compliance obligations and penalties for non-compliance. On the first camp, we have, let's say, the US, Japan. On the other side, we have the EU with the EU AI Act, China with different setup, different motivation, but certainly, you know, regulation that is enforceable, that is actionable. We have countries like Brazil and Chile that began by adapting and adopting the AI Act, but are now lobbied very heavily to water it down. And much of the rest of the world moving somewhere in between. The question is, first of all, is that okay? Is it okay to have a patchwork and let things develop? At the same time, if that is okay, how can we justify what is happening in the US, where there was a patchwork of state regulations? It was the US in a way was like the whole world. I mean, there were different states doing different regulations, and now boom, this is supposed to stop if that thing clears the Senate. So, to start, Marc, you have written a book this year about the regulation landscape. Can you say a few quick words about that, and then we proceed to the discussion?
Okay, although I really wanted to throw in a provocation on the digital divide in AI. Maybe we'll get a chance to come back to that. This book which is published now.
Which I happen to have on my lap.
I'm sorry? This book, which I published about a month ago, the AI Policy Source Book, is actually an updated version of a book I published first in 2019. And I wrote the original book after I surveyed, I think we're at the time about 800 frameworks for ethical and responsible AI. And it really was a period of principles and what we might call soft law, and all the big companies had their 8 principles or 4 principles or whatever it was. When I did it this time, I was really struck by how much progress had been made in the last 5 years in AI governance. And I think this is the untold story, because we hear about the rapid evolution of the technology, and I don't know, are we on to Claude 4 or ChatGPT 4.0 or something? But the rate of acceleration in the governance frameworks is striking. And it's striking also if you compare it to other areas of digital policy, like data protection, for example. I mean, I can go back to the Data Protection Directive of 1992 and track the steps up to the GDPR, and we had a gradual evolution. This is moving much more quickly. And I think that's good news, by the way, because it means that governments are aware, that people are engaged. We may agree or disagree. The AI Act is imperfect, to be sure, but there's an act. The second point, I think I disagree with you a bit, George. There's far more convergence on governing principles than most people are aware of. I mean, every country has its regulatory traditions and its unique circumstances. That's always been true in every sector. But what is remarkable about this 5-year period is the convergence. And you look at the United Nations, for example, where you have resolutions titled Safe, Secure, and Trustworthy AI. Everybody has signed up for that. Fairness, accuracy, and transparency, everybody has signed up for that. I think where we are in this moment is less in a debate about how to govern AI, which we actually have a pretty good understanding of. We're in a moment where we have to ask the question, how do we implement and enforce the governance norms we have established? And that's actually a big issue for the AI Act right now, because there's a lot of discussion, does it go forward, right? Council of Europe AI Treaty, remarkable achievement. 40 countries have signed on to a legally binding international treaty for AI governance. Will it be ratified? Will it be enforced? So, as I said, I mean, I do hope people will find this. It's available for free online. You can get the print version if you have some room in your suitcase. But the more important point is to recognize that this is actually the untold story of artificial intelligence. In our modern age, we are trying our very best to figure out the rules to govern this new technology. And I think that's a very positive development.
Fine. So there is indeed a lot of convergence on the motherhood and apple pie level principle statements. The key challenge now is, as you brought up the example of the Council of Europe, after the ratification, will that be transcribed into national law so it can be enforced? Until that time, I don't think we can expect any measurable impact. But let's go around. What would you like to see happening, or what do you see happening? What do you expect to happen in the regulatory landscape? Yes, Paula?
Yes, thank you. I go back to the global and the global south again, and what is called now politically correct cultural east, okay, and the need to have the global south and the cultural east into the discussions. Why? Because there is a lot happening, as you said, Wendy, that we here in the western part might be, also incorporating, but also because the reality about regulation in many countries in the global south is completely different than it is in others. So in many countries, having a piece of legislation approved doesn't need that there is any intention to implement it or any capacity to implement it. Many times it's approved because this way you are pleasing whoever is funding you to do it. And that's a reality. So if we are talking about global issues, because the governance of AI, it's about global issues. The companies are global, the issues are global. You might have a piece of legislation in a country that is enforced, then a company will find a loophole to do something in the neighboring country that doesn't have any framework or any regulation or any intention to implement this regulation and find a way to do things. So the reality is that there are many countries out there that there is no rule of law, and there are many pieces of legislation that might be approved because of the ripple effect, you know, or a copy-paste effect that we have with the GDPR, and now we're going to have with the EU Act, that might not need that there is any intention or any will to be implemented. So we need to address that. So I go back to the governance of AI is a global issue. Either all the stakeholders start trusting each other, you know, and talking to each other to face this challenge together and to tap into the gains that we can have together, or then it's going to be a tough one. I stop here.
Fair enough, a good point. This leads me to ask a related question to the panel concerning regulation. You said stakeholders. Huh? So who should be the stakeholders? I mean, we have governments, we have the private sector, I mean, especially the big companies that, let's say, are called upon to develop and apply the technology. We also have civil society. And how should civil society be involved? There was a statement by Eric Schmidt not so long ago that said that this technology is complicated. You should leave it to those that know. I can't remember the quote exactly, but that's what he said. The underlying technology is complicated, but its impact on society, is it that prohibitively complex? Can civil society get meaningfully involved, also in terms of citizen assembly or whatever was discussed at the opening session? Wendy.
So I always give the example, because my worry with, my immediate worry with a lot of this is that we are completely destroying the internet, the content of the legitimacy of the internet in terms of content, right? Because we are using AI to do search, it comes up with the wrong answers. That stays in the system. Nobody can verify, correct feedback. If you notice a wrong answer, like I said about the first female professor, anyone found the first female professor of CS in the UK? You won't, I don't, well anyway. My answer is always, look at Wikipedia. And I haven't been able to tackle Jimmy Wales lately. I know him, but I haven't got a direct contact with him, and he doesn't reply to emails like a lot of people. But Wikipedia is, I think, the only place to go where you get some sense of validity of what's in there because of the constant feedback loops. It's a system that works by people. You have the provenance of who's edited what. You can see how things have been edited. You can correct something, and then that can be overcorrected. There are a system of moderators and editors. Okay, they all report up to the Wikipedia board, but there is almost a democracy in the way that works. And I would really like to have I would love to see if we could scale that up to enable society to contribute to the information system, the AI ecosystem that AI is enabling us to create. So that when I know something, I'm seeing something that I know is wrong that's come from an AI, I can report it. Now, I say report carefully because in China, they're very used to reporting things, and you know it's part of the culture is you report on your neighbours or your family, even in the culture. But in terms of feedback loops, we can learn from all these systems and think about how we can do that in a way that makes us feel we're contributing to and get involved. It's nothing to do with the technology. It's about moderating the content. In a way that is safe for people to do, right? Not like our Twitter lady who's got in prison for 2.5 years for putting one tweet out that was a hate crime. Anyway, so I always put that out as my model. I haven't worked through how you scale it up.
But this is a very constructive suggestion, a sort of Wikipedia model approach to get civil society really involved and participating in the shaping of regulation and in the dynamic adjustment and correction of regulation, which also comes into discussion now in the context of attempted simplification. And I think you had mentioned that earlier. So Anja, and then Marc wants to say something.
No, actually, extremely interesting points, because what we are currently working on is also an initiative called the Eurostack. So I don't know how many of you have perhaps heard this term, but civil society is extremely crucial in this process, because who knows best how to interpret fundamental rights from a fundamental rights-oriented perspective. It is certainly not going to be the big corporations that are going to tell me how I'm supposed to exercise my right to data protection or privacy.
But they do.
They attempt. No, they attempt indeed. And then I hope many of you were also contacted through your friends' informal channels or even the news about your possibility to opt out from certain training data practices on popular platforms. And that this has reached 8 p.m. news level shows already that there's concern and that civil society is doing actually a good job. It's underfunded, it's underappreciated, but we have to involve them in all of these aspects. And because you've mentioned the Wikipedia, grassroots up, peer-reviewed approach, lovely, beautiful. But one thing that I'm in my daily practice see every day is that there is so little organization. So there's many great ideas, but they have to get together. I myself organized a stakeholder workshop with civil society, with different civil society actors, just on AI, because as you know, the AI Act foresees a code of practice on generative AI, and the weighting. How does a voice of civil society is regarded in the process of these guidelines and the establishment of these guidelines is completely different in comparison to 20 consultancies that represent one stakeholder, namely a bigger platform. So here we see there's just not enough strength behind it, but it doesn't undermine the validity and the necessity of such interventions. And just if I may, unfortunately I don't have a fancy book, but I have ideas that I can bring from Brussels. Please try to find a possibility to support initiatives such as the Eurostack, or to engage yourselves as well in the framework of open source platforms, social media services. Try to not use a popular messaging service that is run by BackTech, but go for Signal, for instance. The more of us use it, then we will be able to have a more privacy-friendly environment for all of us.
It's not perfect though, but anyway, yeah.
So but complaining is such a German approach.
Marc.
So what?
So I have a brief point on civil society and also on Wikipedia. And let me say, having done a lot of work with civil society over many years, I absolutely agree. It's a critical piece of the policy process. It's also what gives validity and legitimacy to an outcome. Because if you're broadly representing, educators and artists and just people across all of these activities who live with the consequences of regulation, I think it's very important. But one thing I have learned over the years about civil society, and I feel funny sounding so positive being from the US at this moment. This is probably just a passing phase. It's jet lag. It's probably jet lag. Thank you. I think it's very important to think of young people as a key constituency in civil society. And I think this is something that we learned in the US, particularly as we came to understand the social impact of social media and how it was impacting, this emerging generation. They have a lot to say about the world in which they will live. And groups like Encode and Design It For Us and other similar groups, I think, are a very powerful voice, and I think we need to bring them to the table. But on Wikipedia, so I'm also a great fan of Wikipedia. My concern is that we're going in precisely the opposite direction of the early, transparent, let's see who made that comment, let's have this debate and discussion. And this was actually the point I was going to make about the digital divide. I think we need to...
Isn't that what Wikipedia does, no?
Well, it is the way it works and the way it should work. But, you know, in the early days of the digital divide, we were concerned about internet access because we wanted to give people the opportunity to participate and to make of this new digital world whatever they chose to make of it. And I think that's still a very hopeful vision, this sense of participating and understanding how you're participating. The problem is this. When we're talking about AI today, we're really talking about knowledge machines and knowledge sponges that are capturing a lot of data and using it in very opaque fashion. So, you know, what does it mean to bring AI to Africa? People say, well, you know, of course we want to have African language models, which I think is right, of course. But at the same time, if you're capturing a lot of the personal data, a lot of the cultural history, and if it's being concentrated and controlled by a small number of companies, we actually end up in a very different place from the Wikipedia view. So I think we need to engage this debate about how we promote equity and inclusion, but I think we also have to be very careful about who has access to the information and who controls it.
But the Wikipedia process, without, you know, adopting the whole model, I think is a very reasonable, let's say, approach, along with the citizen assemblies and others, to get civil society involved, because this is something that is missing now. On the young people involvement, I want to point out something that was an experience that Hannes Wertner had recently in talking about the digital humanism to high school students. And he was totally taken aback by the critical thinking and the positions that they had, much more developed than he would have expected. I don't know if I gave justice to it, but so young people should also, and we should find a way to get them involved and provide feedback through these mechanisms. Now, to continue with the regulation, there was a lot of talk about social media and the fact that, let's say, they went unregulated for, according to many people, disclosure, I am one of them, for too long. There was this practically no guidelines were put in place, with the result now that a lot of countries are trying to ban under a certain age. Australia did it first, Greece, Spain, France are doing it now in Europe, and there's a proposal that will go to the summit in June for more to adopt it. Most of these are unenforceable. Are we witnessing now an effect of AI that is novel, namely the fact that there's a lot of discussion about regulating AI and a lot of convergence at the level of principles, as Marc pointed out? Has that also triggered a renaissance, I mean, or a will to regulate social media? I mean, the Take It Down Act in the US, that's the first law on this kind of thing that was ever passed in the US. It's otherwise known as the Melania Law. It's about revenge porn and using deepfakes to nudify people and so on. That is causing a lot of problems. I mean, deepfakes have not affected elections as we thought in 2024, according to most measures, but they have ruined a lot of lives already. So are we seeing, the will to regulate AI, is that also triggering a will to correct what we fail to do with social media?
Well, I can quickly jump in here and say yes. And the best example, and again, it's from the US, we passed this provision known as Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which was a very broad immunity for the internet companies. And part of the reason I don't like this word platform, because it allowed them to capture the revenue of the internet economy, but bear none of the responsibility. And they liked 230 very much, and they said, please don't change it. But what's interesting now, that was in 1997, so here we are, almost 30 years later, and the US Congress, Democrats and Republicans have said there will be no 230 for the AI industry. It's just, we're not going to repeat this mistake. It doesn't mean that they don't want the innovation and the competition. They should want these things. But to give companies the type of very broad immunity that was provided originally, that was a mistake, and I don't think it will be repeated.
Paula, in your experience, in the global south or global east, or what other imprecise euphemism you choose, do you see a concern, for example, for social media or deep fake or revenge porn, that sort of thing? Or is that only us plush Westerners that worry about it?
Well, first, I don't choose the terms. I adopt them. I think that from my experience, I'm just going to talk from my experience in the field working with governments and supporting governments to this digital revolution and all that, is that the main concern is not about social media, it's about public digital infrastructure. Okay, there's no way to adopt AI solutions. And again, governance is not only about managing the risks or preventing risks, it's also about tapping into the benefits. So from my experience on the ground, the main concern is the digital public infrastructure. Many governments just don't have the ability to afford the digital public infrastructure, and they need who? Either donors from other parts of the world that define these terms, to call them with these terms, or private sector. The same private sector that in some forums is evilized, because they are concentrating power, but at the same time, they might be the only ones who can provide this public digital infrastructure. So I think it's more about the debate in those lines and less about social media seen like a less. From my experience, I never heard anybody in government worried about it, but worried about digital public infrastructure, wanting to adopt AI for anything and not being able because many government departments can't pay the internet bill.
Yeah. Okay. Anja, I saw you shaking your head, agreeing violently with Paula. Is that?
It's just for 2 minutes. Let's think about social media not being existent, and if we've declared social media a public good, because it is so crucial for our exchanges with friends, for our Erasmus contacts, for our work-related contacts that when they move abroad. This was the original idea of all social networks. It was a network. It was supposed to help you stay connected, but it has been perverted into a business model that's keeping you hooked in, that is fueled with information that is supposed to not make you leave the platform, and among others also this kind of nudity, the deep fake, the deep porns that you have mentioned, they generate attention, and all of this attention-based business model has led to the downfall of social media. So if you compare what it was built on, what it was established for, what it is now, it is unrecognizable, and therefore we have laws, we have identified these problems, but obviously we are always a tidbit too slow. We try to stay technologically neutral. We have certain provisions on deepfakes, but there are crucial debates as well about what constitutes freedom of speech and what is a deepfake. I will not debate this in the context of pornography, but there will be as well borderline cases where it will be challenging, and courts may have varying opinions about this. But overall, there was a understanding of the problems that were created with the deployment of artificial intelligence, but before that of social media. And we are seeing now that there's quite a lot of enforcement. It's slow, it is happening, and overall we just have to discuss, and I think this was brilliantly illustrated in the keynote on yesterday, that the business model is the issue. It's not the network, it's not the platform, it is how it is used by the companies that stand behind it.
Wendy, still on the issue of regulation, and assuming that we accept that AI is already triggering or may trigger a review of the attitude towards social media using AI. There's the argument that in countries that pass a ban on social media for children under a certain age, that they're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And the counter-argument to that is that it's not bathwater, it's toxic sludge. So what's your take, bathwater or toxic sludge?
Toxic sludge. I think that the... so I will say I think I talked this morning about the web, when we were writing about web science. Before we started writing, it's our 20th anniversary next year, and we're going to republish all the papers not republish, but re-promote. I'm looking at Nosh because we were talking about this last week. The papers we were writing in 2006, before the social media had become so toxic. And we were talking there about we had to take a socio-technical approach to looking at these ecosystems because of the issues that were going to arise. And we talked about privacy, security, and trust, and all the issues that we see, because people are people. They do bad things as well as good things, and industry is driven by money. And so we actually were quite prescient of what was going to come. And the other thing that in itself, I mean, it's easy with hindsight to say we were right, but actually what do you do now about it? I think AI is driving, it's like the toxicity on steroids, because it's driving a lot of the bad behaviors, and it's driving the behavior, the technology the companies use to keep everybody, psychologically involved in the social media. There was a survey taken just recently in the UK, about 2 weeks ago. I think it was The Guardian did it, so somebody respectable. And of youngsters, under 18s, I think it was, and the sort of basic conclusion of this survey was the kids I can't think of the right phrase, didn't want the internet. They wanted to get rid of the internet. Now, it's not that... The bigger picture of all that was clearly not what they were talking about, but in terms of it was the language of saying this stuff was, that there's in their hands that they can't avoid using because everyone else is using, and psychologically they're driven to use it by they actually don't want it. And I think we're going to see a fair amount of rebellion from the youngsters themselves, actually, as well as us. Thinking about the best way to help. I mean, we stop kids drinking, driving, taking drugs, if at all possible, doing things that are harmful to them, but we let them play with this technology, which is destroying lives all the time. And we have to take responsibility for that.
Thank you.
And you can't just push it onto the companies in terms of content.
A very strong point. The article, by the way, was in the Guardian newspaper.
Was it Guardian? Yeah.
Guardian, it was. For me, startling percentage of young people, the ones that are supposed to be addicted, and to live with social networks, they said they were against having anything to do with the internet.
You sent me the link. I remember now.
Huh?
You sent me the link to that article.
No, Annie did.
Huh?
Annie did.
Annie did. Oh, okay, right. One of the websites trust
you
people.
can look at it, but it is something is beginning to change. The young people, like the young people that Hannes talked with, are not. We should not assume that they are all, jumping up and down like kitten with an overdose of catnip about social media and the internet. They're quite aware, and they're already reacting. And I think it's our duty to at least make sure that they're heard by all those.
And as I said, I believe that the Indian summit is going to focus on the impact of AI on children. I believe. That's what I've heard anyway, which would be a good thing. I do have to go in 3 minutes.
Okay, before she goes, and then we move to the closure part. Yes?
Yeah, I have just one question. Why did content...
Take the microphone, please.
I have just one question. Why did content moderation completely fell off any agenda of the tech companies?
It did not. It's not. Content moderation is a very, very integral part of the DSA. What we actually have to worry about is overblocking. We don't have to worry so much about content moderation because there are quite a lot of, we have trusted flaggers.
The companies can't deal with it. It won't scale to enable the companies to deal with it.
What we actually have anticipated with the AI Act is as well the proliferation of bots that will create something called inauthentic behavior. So there's also provisions for that. So it's actually, it is foreseen at the moment. It's just that we are adapting. As you said, AI implementation is at the core of what we are discussing.
But my question is, who is responsible? Is it the tech companies or is it governance? Whose responsibility?
The tech companies, for the time being, legally are not responsible.
But I mean, we've had this issue with the Online Safety Act. It's really hard to get who is responsible. You can't push it all onto the companies. It can't all be covered by regulation. Some of it has to be dealt with by society.
Yes,
and it's those three coming together, and you can't regulate it all.
And that comes also under the digital ethics discussion that was brought up in previous stages at this conference, because it was Judge Brandeis that said law should float on a sea of ethics. That has to be underneath, and unless you have that, laws will not be accepted by society. Anna, I think one question, and then Wendy has to go.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Anna Bon. I'm from Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. I have a question about the Eurostack. So you mentioned the Eurostack.
I'll go then. Right. Well, you answer that. I'll go.
I think we have to prioritize questions to Wendy.
Oh,
no, it's all right, because I let her answer the Eurostack. I would say look at the India stack. If you look at the India stack. Know the India stack?
No.
Well, you should. You should look at the India stack. India have led the way in terms of stacks on the internet. It's not all right, but look what they've done with the Aadhaar number and giving everybody in India, everybody, whether they had a birth certificate or not, access to the internet and a banking account and everything they had in COVID. Absolutely amazing. And they've built their digital public infrastructure on top of that to give an equal playing field on access to the internet. Doesn't mean there aren't problems in India, but so far, the Supreme Court in India has stopped the government from using the Aadhaar number as access to find out about people's financial affairs and so on, so far. And you should really, if you're going to build a Eurostack, you should look at what the Indians have done first before you start, work out what worked and what didn't. But I'm a great believer in digital identities. And I really think we need to move into that direction. I think it will keep us much safer as long as we have the laws in place for privacy and security on that, because otherwise we're just F-word in an AI world if we don't have that.
And now you have to move in the direction of the airport.
I do, yeah. So look at the India stack.
I think one aspect, ask the question about the Eurostack, and then I'm happy to compliment.
Have a nice trip, Wendy, and thank you. Okay.
Say hello to the Prime Minister.
Safe trip. Bon voyage. We heard that. Now we come to the last
the
part, and then what time is left we'll devote to questions. We'll finish at 30 minutes past the hour.
I think we have the question already.
Can I ask a question first
yeah.
about the Eurostack, or should we continue?
No, let's keep it for the end. Huh? Keep it for the end. I want to come now to the issue of the attacks that are happening on regulation. Okay, I call them attack. If someone wants to adopt softer language, that's okay. Pushback, there's a general, let's say, pushback on regulation. Vicious attacks. Okay. He is on my left. There are others that are on my right. There are attacks, and we should be aware of that. Some of them come from just political ideology. Some of it may be honest, I mean, intellectually honest. There are people that they're the free speech absolutists, you know, that, I mean, anything, including the Take It Down Act was attacked, as Marc has also noted, I think, in his newsletter, was attacked by free speech advocates that, you know, this should not happen. There are other attacks that are motivated by corporate profit, by the big tech companies that do not want any kind of regulation if they could have their way about it. These are converging at the moment and are helped inadvertently by the push for simplification. There is a push for well-intentioned push for simplification. In Europe, the Draghi report called for it, but it was referring to the patchwork of national regulation and the fact that companies had to adhere to very different kinds of regulation. But it's interpreted by some to mean that regulation like the AI Act, for example, should be watered down. And we saw that the Code of Practice, which is the instrument of enforcing the AI Act, was successfully attacked. At least it was delayed. It was supposed to be approved in May. The deadline now moved to August. And I just read in MLEX this morning that the implementation of the AI Act, which was scheduled for 2026, may also be moved. At the same time, there are people that are saying that the penalties that other regulation foresees, like the Digital Markets Act, the Digital Services Act, are scaled down so as not to hurt the feelings of the US government and the companies that it protects. And there are some examples of fines that were applied recently that were far below what, let's say, was the maximum fine. Nobody would argue that the maximum fine should be applied. But if this is the result of pressure, and if all these converging forces at the end take all the teeth out of regulation, then this will be a big step forward. Let me start this with Marc, who I think is following these things very closely.
Right. So I would say one of the big changes in the US between the two administrations is that President Biden had done a good job building consensus with the industry, with the academics, with civil society. He had lots of meetings in the White House, listened to people. We had, I would say, sort of, with regard to the private sector, maybe a soft touch regulatory approach. However, with regard to government procurement, there are very clear regulations, there are very clear prohibitions that President Biden established, which President Trump had carried forward. So that's another untold story, a lot of continuity there. I think to your point, George, what we're witnessing now is in the US, the collapse of this consensus. So the private sector's of the view, and now, of course, we're talking about the Silicon Valley, tech bro worldview, get out of our way, let us do what we want to do, China, 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 which is how we say in Congress, don't regulate. And on the other side, the people who want the good regulation are now actually speaking up, and speaking up more loudly, because you did not have 40 state attorney generals in President Biden's era saying we need state legislation to establish guardrails to protect the public. And they're speaking up, and the state lawmakers are speaking up, and civil society is speaking up. So we have now more of a public debate, which may actually be a good thing. We'll see what happens. To be sure, at the federal level, it will be interesting to see if this moratorium passes. I said earlier I don't think it will. I'm not prepared to bet my house. But I would say it's more likely than not that it doesn't. And we'll see a lot of activity in the States. We have a very, if you follow these things, there are a lot of resources. A very good resource in the US is the website maintained by the National Conference of State Legislators. And there are now, in the 50 US states, over 1,000 AI-related bills. And these are, just everything from training data to labor displacement, to environmental impact, to literacy, to training, to competition, on it goes. There's a lot of work to do because we don't have
one AI Act.
We don't have an AI Act. So yes, there's clearly pushback, a vigorous pushback, maybe to use a different word, Moshe, but also I think there's equally vigorous initiative to move forward in the US.
Okay. Anja, and then I will ask for questions. The quick word about what's your feeling in Brussels? I mean, Digital Humanism sent a letter, as Hannes said in the opening, which is now asking effectively the European Union to stand firm against these attacks. And this is now with the European Parliament Petitions Committee. What's your feeling? Will Europe stand firm?
I have a hope and I have a realistic approach. My hope is that we will indeed stand firm, but I'm under the impression that indeed in the course of the next months, what we will collect is evidence that indeed the AI Act is a cumbersome and burdensome piece of legislation and that we need to become more competitive. However, how do you define competitiveness and what is at stake here? So our primary law is the strongest source of law that we have, so fundamental rights. And unfortunately, I'm thinking that we will see that the AI Act will be reopened, despite the fact that, as you pointed out, it's not applicable to its full extent yet. And on the GDPR, we already had first 3 provisions reviewed. So there are 3 provisions that will be changed in the GDPR already. This whole thing comes under the, under the umbrella, stop the clock. So this is the official Brussels term. So we will stop the clock on enforcement. We will stop the clock on making these provisions applicable. And I'm sad to say that I'm expecting this to be happening, yes.
That's not very optimistic, but okay. Questions?
Thank you. So the question to Anja about Eurostack. And I would like to ask you, because I worked on, let's say, on the digital divide for more than 19 years at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. And I worked in West Africa, for example. And I have seen, let's say, the technology changing from zero, basically, when we started in 2006, where people hardly had a GSM phone, to now that people have smartphones also in rural areas. And they're starting, and if you go to a very small rural area in Burkina Faso, you see that there's a small cyber cafe where you can buy cryptocurrency. I mean, it's amazing the ability to leapfrog actually into the digital age. On the other hand, we are seeing that people, for example, in these countries are consuming technology. They're not contributing to, it's not contributing to their economic development. You only see them consuming. And with regard to the Eurostack report that I just read, and also the talk that Christiane gave this morning about the narratives, and you saw that what we were discussing, that Europe is changing from maybe the coloniality narrative, or from the GDPR narrative to the coloniality narrative. Where does Europe stand in policy, let's say in governance of AI, towards the global South countries that are, let's say, will be the lower phase of the coloniality stack, actually, if you see Europe as beneath the China and US, let's say, in the hierarchy of the digital society in technology. Are we not colonizing these countries, or continue these countries to keep them very low on the level?
This is a very high-level question, and I'm grateful that you're raising this subject, because it is, we have to also critically look at this from the perspective that you are outlining. Through the Global Gateway initiatives, it's well-intentioned. We will need to see whether our perspective, our lens on what we think is aid, or what our programs that we are developing, whether this reaches this objective. As you say, it can facilitate, but we would like to go a bit further, but at the same time not go about it in a neo-colonial way, I would say. It's time to tell, but I think that at the moment there is awareness for this, but we need to figure out how to make this best applicable to the, what is the correct term? I don't want to use the incorrect one, but yeah, indeed, it's a very high-level question, which I could only reply to in speculative terms.
Another question.
Thank you, all three of you, to bring kind of providing me with insights how complicated, complex, and intricate the whole regulatory and governing questions are to tackle from US view, European view, global South, cultural West. And I'm a little bit concerned, because I see technology is running on steroids, and the whole legislation, governing bodies, because there's so much consensus, bringing all at the table, is really lagging behind for the right reasons. Is not. What is your view? Because I'm kind of concerned this is running away, and we are far behind in regulating or finding a consensus. So I would be interested in all three. What is your prediction?
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm also worried about the new governance challenges, the things that we are still not talking about. And you mentioned before social media. Maybe what we are doing now with social media is trying to catch up and trying to do something post. So there are new things happening, and I love data when I talk. So let me give you some data about emotional AI and the explosion of emotional AI and affective AI. So we have moved from AI creating fake news to create fake humans, okay? And AI companions are on the rising. The app My AI has over 150 million users. Replica has 30 million users. Xiaoxie, Microsoft China-based chatbot, has 660 million users. And then in terms of affective AI, so beyond companions, girlfriend or boyfriend, there's an estimate of 52 million people. That's bigger than my country, Spain. The population has a boyfriend or a girlfriend that is fake and is created by AI. Okay, so these are things that are new, are happening and exploding in speed, as you say, and we're not even talking about them yet, you know? Okay. Yeah.
One last question.
So,
US perspective.
I'm sorry.
yeah, if you don't mind, I'm going to read just one paragraph from the conclusion of my book. I have 6 insights, but my final one is: we need to underscore the urgency of AI governance. Companies and countries are rushing quickly into a future they do not fully understand. The leading AI experts caution that advanced AI systems are not reliable or trustworthy. They have urged us to pause, at least to implement the safeguards and guardrails necessary for sustainable progress. Others warn that many of the AI systems already deployed lack meaningful transparency and accountability. Bias is embedded and replicated at scale.
Well phrased, huh? But that's the situation. The last question of this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I've been struggling with this idea of governing and regulation and all that, because I'm trying to imagine, or I'm trying to understand, what world are we imagining if we assume we could govern it? What is it we want really out of the regulation? There are these beautiful principles. you know. We don't want to have these kinds of deep fakes about certain things, but we like to be able to allow people to be creative by creating these virtual beings, because, you know, there's something interesting about that. There's nothing wrong with it, right? It's how it's used that's wrong. But what does it mean to regulate? What are you imagining this world to be? And, you know, I'm trying to also draw a thread through everything I've heard here, right? So we heard first, this is about a business model. It's all about a business model, okay? And it's based on this network effect and getting more people. We heard that these are extra governmental institutions, you know, creating their own laws and regulations in some sense, and affecting how society operates. And then we hear this conversation, which, well, we have to have a government that is regulating things, but the government isn't part of this whole story about the business plan or about the institutions. And we don't even know what we want, I think, after we have all those regulations in place. So I'm really kind of mystified about how this whole big story is actually drawn together.
I think if there was consensus, whether or not we need a seatbelt for social media, because this discussion, the seatbelt was also very controversial back in the day, before we made it mandatory in cars. If there is a consensus that social media actually requires such safeguards, that we need to protect people, children, from it, then amazing. But unfortunately, at the moment, what we see is that, and this is a bit like a wrap-up from my side, the pressure from corporations, from companies on governments, the mutual dependencies do not allow us to come to such a conclusion and to have such a consensus in society, because I think nobody wants to seek companionship from a virtual being. If it was possible to seek companionship in a interhuman way, this would be likely the preferred option for that person. However, at the moment, society has developed into a more detached, isolated. It is what it is, and we have to work on changing these factors. And then, at the same time, have in parallel discussions about governance, have parallel discussions about the necessity to regulate, to ban, potentially, because indeed also businesses have certain rights, and we also have to balance these. But overall, we are more divided than ever on everything. And we need to seek consensus on all levels, but this is a Herculean task. And none of us, if we had the silver bullet for this, I don't know.
Okay. It's time to bring this to a close. Let me take a cue from what Anja said about digital or the AI companions that are envisioned or promoted. A child or children born this year will be probably healthy 75 at the end of the century. Most of us in this room have had experience between the analog world and the digital world and the merging of the two, as Hannes talked about in the opening. The children born in 2025 will be immersed in a digital world. They will not have the experience of an analog world. Now, they should have the right to fashion, to shape their world, their digital world. Will they have this opportunity if they're provided from the start with AI mentors and AI companions created by the techno-leviathan, as someone in an earlier panel called it? Isn't it our responsibility to give those children at least a chance to shape their own world? And to close, in digital humanism, it is often said, repeated, that we have a moral duty to be optimistic, and I know Marc shares this. But we also have a moral duty to do something, to act, so as to make this optimism a bit more justifiable. I want to thank our panel for this afternoon. I want to thank all of you for your attention.